The road into Holmes County disappeared beneath a blanket of snow long before sunset. Winter had tightened its grip across rural Ohio, covering the fields, fences, and rooftops in silence. The sky hung low and gray, and every breath outside felt sharp enough to cut through skin. The kind of cold that brings power lines down, the kind of cold that leaves modern families sitting in the dark, wrapped in every blanket they own, watching their phone batteries die. Because here's something most people don't realize until it's already too late. When the power goes out in winter, modern heating becomes completely useless. No furnace runs without electricity, no thermostat works without a signal. No central heating system operates when the grid goes dark. Families call that a crisis. The Amish call it Tuesday, because somewhere in the middle of that frozen Ohio landscape, buried deep inside Holmes County, stood an old Amish farmhouse that hadn't needed the power grid in decades. No electricity running through its walls, no gas line connected beneath its floors, no generator humming in the background, no modern HVAC system clicking on and off every few minutes. From the outside, it looked like any other simple farmhouse scattered across rural Ohio. Weathered wood, dim lantern light, a quietness that felt almost unnatural. But the moment the narrator stepped inside, something felt wrong. Not bad wrong, impossible wrong. The warmth hit first, not the dry, artificial heat that gets blasted through overhead vents, not the kind that leaves one room boiling hot while the next room stays cold enough for blankets. This warmth felt alive, gentle, even, almost human in the way it wrapped itself around the body instead of blasting from one direction. Outside, the temperature had fallen well below freezing. Inside, every single corner of the farmhouse felt exactly the same. The kitchen was warm. The hallway was warm. The upstairs bedrooms were warm. Even the bare floor beneath his feet carried heat. There were no visible radiators, no ducts hidden in the ceilings, no thermostat glowing on the wall like a command center, no connection to any outside energy source at all. And that was the first mystery. Because modern homes, with all their advanced engineering, smart climate systems, and expensive insulation, still struggle to create even heat. One room becomes unbearably hot while another stays cold. Families constantly adjust thermostats, argue over temperature settings, and pile on extra layers at night. Yet this centuries-old farmhouse had somehow solved that problem better than modern technology ever had, without spending a single dollar on monthly utility bills. Then came the second mystery. In the center of the home stood what looked like a large masonry bench attached to a massive brick structure. It resembled part fireplace, part oven, part sculpture. But unlike anything the narrator had ever seen inside a modern home, there were no raging flames inside it, no glowing coals, no crackling fire. In fact, the Amish homeowner mentioned casually, the fire had gone out 6 hours earlier. 6 hours! The narrator assumed the structure would be cool by now, maybe slightly warm at best, the way a stone wall holds a little afternoon sun before releasing it by nightfall. But when he pressed his hand flat against the bench, his expression changed instantly. It was still warm, not lukewarm, not slightly heated, warm like human skin, warm like something still alive inside the stone. The heat didn't sit on the surface either. It radiated from deep within the masonry, slowly, steadily, as if the entire structure had become a giant thermal battery that stored invisible fire inside its walls and released it hour by hour without flame, without smoke, without any visible source at all. That single moment shattered every expectation about how heating was supposed to work. How could a fire that died 6 hours ago still be warming an entire farmhouse? Where was the energy coming from? Why did no room feel warmer or colder than any other? And why, in an age of smart homes and digital thermostats, had nobody told the rest of the world about this? The Amish homeowner smiled quietly, almost amused by the confusion. To him, there was nothing mysterious about it at all. This was simply how homes had once been heated, before the modern world convinced people that warmth was something you purchased month by month from a utility company rather than something you built once and lived inside forever. Then came the sentence that transformed curiosity into obsession. "This whole system cost me around $50 to build." The narrator paused. He assumed he had misheard. Modern heating systems cost anywhere from $8,000 to $20,000 once installation, ductwork, and long-term maintenance are factored in. Families across America spend an average of $1,400 every single year just to keep their homes warm during winter. Over the course of 30 years, that becomes roughly $42,000, flowing out of the household and into utility companies, fuel suppliers, and HVAC contractors year after year, without end. And this man, in this farmhouse, had solved the exact same problem for $50, using clay, brick, and sticks from his own land. The warmth filling the room was undeniable proof that something extraordinary was happening here. And then the homeowner told him what it was called, a rocket mass heater. Most people have never heard those three words together, and that, as the narrator would soon discover, was not an accident. But first, he needed to understand how it actually worked, because what happened inside that structure defied everything modern society had accepted about heating. Here's the truth that nobody in the heating industry wants you to think about too carefully. Most modern wood stoves look powerful. Open the door and you'll see roaring flames climbing toward 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. To the average homeowner, that looks like efficiency. Intense fire must mean intense heating, but that assumption hides something devastating. Roughly 65% of that heat escapes straight up the chimney. The fire burns hot, but the system itself wastes most of the energy it produces. Along with all that wasted heat, traditional stoves also push thick smoke, filled with unburned gases and particles straight out of the house, essentially fuel that never finished burning, just released into the atmosphere without ever doing its job. In other words, conventional wood stoves don't just waste wood, they waste fire itself. The rocket mass heater operates on a completely different philosophy. Hidden inside the structure sits a carefully engineered combustion chamber, what builders call a J-shaped or L-shaped burn tunnel. Unlike a traditional stove, this chamber is heavily insulated and designed to concentrate heat rather than release it, forcing temperatures upward in a way that changes the fundamental nature of combustion. Not 1,000 degrees, closer to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. And at those temperatures, something extraordinary happens that most people have never seen before and can barely believe when they first hear about it. The smoke itself ignites. That is the secret hidden inside the brick. Most people assume smoke is simply waste leaving the fire. Grey clouds of spent material drifting harmlessly up the chimney. But smoke isn't waste. Smoke is unburned fuel. It contains particles, gases, and combustible material that never fully ignited because ordinary stoves don't burn hot enough to finish the job. The rocket system changes that completely. As superheated air rushes through the insulated burn tunnel, those unburned gases and particles reach a temperature where they have no choice but to ignite, creating what amounts to a second fire burning inside the first. The exhaust that eventually leaves the chimney? Almost no visible smoke, almost no detectable odor, mostly water vapor and carbon dioxide, the same gases released by breathing. The system burns cleaner than most EPA-certified commercial wood stoves, while running entirely on small sticks and fallen branches. Not giant split logs, not expensive cords of hardwood firewood, not fuel pellets purchased in bags from the hardware store, just sticks, fallen branches, scrap lumber, Thin pieces of wood that any forest or backyard drops naturally, year after year, completely free. The narrator watched the Amish homeowner feed small handfuls of sticks into the system, barely enough to fill a grocery bag, while the farmhouse maintained the same even warmth in every room. It looked impossible, because by every assumption modern society had built around heating, it was impossible. But the fire was only half the system. The real secret, the part that explained why a 6-hour-old fire could still warm a house, was the mass. Modern heaters are built from metal because metal heats fast. Touch a metal stove 20 minutes after lighting it, and you'll feel the heat radiating off its surface intensely. But metal has a hidden weakness that the heating industry never advertises. Metal loses heat just as fast as it gains it. The moment the fire dies, a metal stove begins cooling rapidly. Within an hour, it's barely warm. Within 2 hours, it's cold. The homeowner is forced back into the endless cycle. More wood, more fire, more fuel, more labor, just to maintain the same temperature they had an hour ago. Stone behaves differently. Brick behaves differently. Clay behaves differently. Cob, a mixture of clay, sand and straw used for centuries in construction, behaves differently. These materials absorb enormous amounts of thermal energy slowly, and they release it back just as slowly, radiating warmth outward hour after hour, long after any visible flame has disappeared. The bench the narrator sat on, the wall he leaned against, the floor beneath his feet, all of it was thermal mass, absorbing heat from that brief, intensely hot fire and releasing it back into the living space at a slow, steady, even rate that no metal stove could match. The structure hadn't just been built around the fire, it had become the fire. Charged once like a battery, then discharging warmth slowly for 12 hours, 18 hours, sometimes a full 24 hours after a single short burn. No constant feeding, no staying awake all night to keep the fire going, no waking at 3 a.m. to add more wood, no emergency when the power cuts out in the middle of a January blizzard. The house itself had become a thermal engine, storing heat like a battery, distributing it like a radiator, running entirely without electricity, without gas, without any connection to any outside infrastructure whatsoever. And suddenly, standing in that farmhouse with his hand pressed against stone, still warm 6 hours after the fire died, the narrator understood something that felt almost criminal in its simplicity. Modern heating systems are designed to consume energy continuously. This system consumed energy briefly and then simply rested. What the narrator didn't realize yet was how old this idea actually was. Because this wasn't an invention, it was a rediscovery. Civilizations across the world had understood thermal mass heating for thousands of years before modern furnaces ever existed, and they had built systems that modern engineers still struggle to match in efficiency and comfort. The Romans constructed hypocaust systems nearly 2,000 years ago, channeling hot air beneath stone floors to heat entire villas. Bathhouses and public buildings, wealthy Romans didn't sit beside roaring fires. They walked on warm floors while heat radiated upward from the stone beneath them, distributed evenly throughout the building without a single vent or duct. In northern China, families slept on heated masonry platforms called kang systems, structures that stored warmth overnight through winters that would freeze exposed skin in minutes. Generations of Chinese families lived inside buildings designed around stored heat rather than active fire, spending a fraction of the fuel that comparable Western heating would have required. Korean architects perfected ondol heating thousands of years ago, circulating heat from a central fire through channels built beneath stone floors, creating a system of radiant warmth from the ground up that engineers today acknowledge as one of the most efficient architectural heating designs ever created. Ondol-inspired radiant floor heating is experiencing a global revival in modern architecture precisely because it outperforms conventional forced air systems in both comfort and efficiency. For over 4,500 years, human civilizations had independently discovered the same principle again and again: store heat inside mass. Don't try to heat air, heat stone, and let stone heat the people. Even Mark Twain encountered this technology and couldn't stop writing about it. During his travels through Germany in 1878, Twain discovered masonry heating systems common throughout European homes, enormous ceramic and brick structures that stored heat inside their bodies, rather than sending it up chimneys the way American fireplaces did. He was stunned by how efficiently these systems operated. A brief fire in the morning could warm an entire house through the afternoon and evening. He reportedly described them as some of the greatest stoves in the world. That was 150 years ago. The technology existed. It had been proven across multiple civilizations on multiple continents across thousands of years. The world's most celebrated American writer personally documented its superiority over conventional heating in published writing. And then, in the span of a few post-war decades, most of the modern world forgot it existed. Not because it failed, because something replaced it. Something far more profitable. After World War II, America entered an era of aggressive modernization unlike anything it had ever seen before. New suburbs spread rapidly across the country. Developers built tens of thousands of identical houses at remarkable speed. Companies flooded into the new consumer economy, selling visions of futuristic living. Automatic appliances, bright kitchens, electric everything, and central heating systems that promised effortless comfort at the push of a button. The advertising was sophisticated and relentless. Central heating wasn't just sold as a product, it was sold as a symbol of education, of success, of having arrived at the modern version of a good life. Meanwhile, old masonry heating systems, the same systems that had kept human beings warm for thousands of years, were quietly and deliberately rebranded: dirty, primitive, something poor people use because they can't afford better. The message was subtle but devastatingly effective. Modern people don't heat their homes with stone and fire. They push buttons, they pay bills, they subscribe to comfort. And an entire industrial ecosystem grew up around that single idea. Utility companies delivering gas and electricity. HVAC manufacturers designing systems that needed to be replaced every 15 years. Fuel suppliers operating on recurring monthly contracts. Maintenance contractors called every time something broke, which was constantly. Insurance systems built around the assumption that modern mechanical heating was the only legitimate option. Industry after industry stacked itself on top of the simple recurring fact that as long as families depended on external energy systems for warmth, those families would keep paying. Every month, every year, every decade, without end. The math was staggering when laid out plainly. A family paying average heating bills for 30 years would spend roughly $42,000 maintaining indoor comfort, not including repairs, not including the cost of replacing failed systems, not including the rising fuel prices that added to the bill every few years like clockwork. And here, in this farmhouse, stood a man who had solved the same problem. Once. For $50. A rocket mass heater doesn't create a monthly customer. It creates independence, and in an economy built entirely around recurring dependency, independence is extraordinarily difficult to monetize, which brought the narrator to the part of the story he hadn't expected. The part where this technology became, in much of America, effectively illegal. Here is where people usually say, "That can't be right, they can't ban a brick heater," and technically they haven't. What happened was quieter, more bureaucratic, more difficult to point at directly. And precisely because of that, far more effective at keeping these systems out of ordinary American homes. In 37 states across America, building a rocket mass heater or similar custom masonry thermal heating system is either outright prohibited under building codes or buried under layers of regulatory requirements so complex and expensive to satisfy that the result for the average homeowner is functionally identical to a ban. And the mechanism that makes it possible? Certification. The EPA has developed a system for certifying wood-burning appliances. The process involves testing factory-manufactured stoves built to precise, identical specifications, the same stove built the same way, tested the same way, producing the same results every single time. That consistency is what makes certification possible. A custom-built masonry heater doesn't work that way. Every rocket mass heater is slightly different dimensions, different materials sourced from different locations, different configurations based on the shape of the room, the size of the house, the preferences of the builder. No two are exactly alike, and that individuality, which is part of what makes them so adaptable and effective, is exactly what places them outside the certification system entirely. An inspector arrives. He looks for a certification document. There isn't one. There can't be one, because this system was built by hand rather than manufactured in a factory. So he rejects it, not based on whether it heats effectively, not based on whether it burns cleanly, not based on whether it poses any actual danger to the household, based purely on the absence of paperwork that the system was never designed to produce. The result is perverse in a way that becomes more disturbing the longer you think about it. A rocket mass heater that burns at 800 degrees and produces cleaner exhaust than most certified commercial stoves can be declared illegal, while those certified commercial stoves, which waste 65% of their fuel and pump smoke into the atmosphere, remain perfectly legal in every state. The standard isn't performance. The standard is compliance with a system designed around factory products, and custom-built, handcrafted, community-built solutions, by definition, can never meet that standard. One story made the human cost of this system impossible to ignore. An Oregon couple spent months researching, planning, and carefully constructing one of the most efficient and cleanest masonry heating systems their community had ever encountered. Their neighbors barely noticed the chimney. Smoke was almost invisible. The fuel consumption dropped so dramatically that the couple cut their heating costs to nearly nothing. The system performed beyond every expectation, warming their home evenly, quietly, and completely off-grid. Then the inspectors arrived. The couple's system wasn't dangerous. It wasn't polluting excessively. It wasn't causing any harm to anyone. It was simply missing paperwork. They faced sustained legal pressure to dismantle an efficient, clean, hand-built heating system that had cost almost nothing to construct and worked better than any manufactured alternative available at any price. The symbolism was devastating. A heating system that threatened no one, torn down not because of what it did, but because of what it represented, because a family that doesn't need the heating system doesn't need the heating bill, and a family that doesn't need the heating bill is no longer a customer. And here's the detail that pushed the narrator's discomfort into something colder. In many rural counties across the same states where ordinary homeowners face these restrictions, large landowners with significant agricultural property receive exemptions. A farmer on 20 or more acres can often legally classify certain wood-burning structures as agricultural equipment. The same regulations that make a custom masonry heater impossible for a middle-class suburban family simply don't apply the same way to people with enough land to trigger rural exemptions. The system doesn't restrict heating technology equally. It restricts independence for the people who can least afford to remain dependent. And yet, people are finding ways, quietly, creatively, neighbor by neighbor, Some builders have discovered that certain states maintain an important legal distinction between a rocket heater and a masonry heater, and that heavy thermal mass systems above specific weight thresholds sometimes fall into regulatory categories that don't require standard appliance certification. The threshold in many jurisdictions, roughly 1,800 pounds. Build a system heavy enough, packed with enough clay, stone and thermal mass, and it crosses into a different legal category entirely. Not a stove, not an appliance, something older, heavier, more permanent, something the building code simply doesn't have clear language to prohibit. Others build in rural areas where code enforcement presence is limited, designing systems that produce almost zero visible smoke during operation, leaving no obvious chimney evidence, no detectable odor, nothing that draws attention. Some communities share designs the same way knowledge was always shared before corporations decided information should be packaged and sold, privately, between neighbors, face to face. One builder passes a design to another. That builder improves it, passes it on again. The knowledge spreads through trust rather than transaction, exactly the way masonry heating knowledge traveled across civilizations for thousands of years before the industrial economy decided to make warmth into a subscription. One experienced builder revealed another layer of optimization that most beginners never discover: pipe geometry. Instead of allowing hot exhaust gases to escape directly through a short chimney path, an optimized system routes internal piping back and forth through the thermal mass in long serpentine channels, like a maze designed to extract every last degree of heat before anything leaves the structure. Every additional turn of pipe is another opportunity to pull heat from the gas and store it inside the stone. A basic rocket mass heater might radiate warmth for 12 hours after a single burn. An optimized serpentine design, with carefully calculated pipe lengths and thoughtful thermal mass placement, can continue releasing stored heat for nearly 24 hours from that same single burn. On fire in the morning, warmth through the entire day, warmth through the night. Warmth still present the following morning from a fire that has been cold for 24 hours. Modern heating systems consume energy continuously. This system consumes energy once, and then simply rests. Now consider the full comparison, laid out plainly, without rhetoric, without exaggeration. A modern central heating system, $8,000 to $20,000 to purchase and install, without a $400 per year average operating cost. $42,000 spent over 30 years, not including repairs, not including system replacements, not including the rising fuel prices that arrive reliably every few years, requires constant electricity to operate, stops working completely the moment the power grid fails, creates uneven heat that varies room by room, produces noise, dry air, and temperature swings that modern families accept as simply the way heating works. A rocket mass heater built from clay, brick, stone, sand, and salvage materials available in nearly any rural area. Costs roughly $50 in materials for a basic functional system. Operates on sticks, small fallen branches that any land produces freely. Works completely without electricity, without gas, without any external energy infrastructure. Heats evenly, walls, floors, benches, and air all at the same temperature. Burns so cleanly it produces almost no visible smoke. Radiates stored warmth for 12 to 24 hours from a single short fire. Lasts for decades with minimal maintenance. Continues functioning perfectly during power outages, fuel shortages, grid failures, and every other crisis that renders modern heating useless. And when the grid goes dark at 2 a.m. on the coldest night of January, the Amish farmhouse in Holmes County stays warm. Every room, every corner, every floor, every hour, without a single wire connecting it to the outside world. This technology survived for thousands of years because it worked. The Romans trusted it beneath their floors. Chinese families slept on it through brutal northern winters. Korean architects built entire cultures of architectural design around it. Mark Twain encountered it in 1878 and wrote that nothing in America compared. Amish communities in Ohio quietly preserved it, while the rest of the country forgot it existed. And then, in the span of a few decades, most of the modern world walked away from all of it. Not because it failed, not because something better replaced it, because an economy of recurring dependency was built around simpler systems that required monthly payment to function, and because anything that threatened that dependency quietly found itself buried under certification requirements, building codes, and regulatory frameworks that made ancient, proven, independent heating technology practically inaccessible to ordinary people. The question the narrator carried out of that farmhouse, hand still warm from pressing it against stone that hadn't seen fire in 6 hours, wasn't whether this system could heat a home. It already had, for thousands of years, across dozens of civilizations, on every inhabited continent on Earth. The question was something more uncomfortable. Why were so many people taught to forget it, and who, exactly, benefited most from that forgetting? Standing in that farmhouse, surrounded by warmth that cost $50 to build and required no monthly bill to maintain, the narrator looked at the Amish homeowner one last time. The man hadn't said anything revolutionary. He hadn't claimed to have invented something new. He hadn't promised miraculous results or secret knowledge. He'd simply kept building the way people had always built, before the modern world decided that warmth was a product to be purchased rather than a principle to be understood. Outside, snow continued falling across Holmes County. Inside, the invisible fire hidden within stone and clay continued radiating warmth, hour after hour, silently defying every modern assumption about what heating was supposed to cost, how it was supposed to work, and who was supposed to control it. No roaring flames, no expensive machinery, no monthly bill, no dependence on any grid, any company, or any system that could fail in the middle of winter and leave a family freezing in the dark. Just stored heat from a fire that had already died hours ago. And standing there, hand pressed against a bench that was still warm, in a house that needed no power to survive the coldest night of the year, the narrator realized he wasn't just looking at an old stove. He was looking at a forgotten idea. An idea that modern society may have abandoned, not because it stopped working, but because it worked too well. Comment below. Tell us your state or your country and what you paid for heating last winter. Let's build a real map. A map showing exactly how expensive dependency has become across America and around the world, and how many people are already quietly searching for another way out. Because the knowledge isn't gone, it's just been waiting, stored inside stone, preserved in Amish farmhouses, passed quietly between neighbors for someone to remember it. The fire went out 6 hours ago, the house is still warm, and it cost $50. What if the most advanced heating system available today was built 2,000 years ago, and someone just made sure you forgot about it?